She saw children being tortured for witchcraft, so she built a sanctuary of hope. Welcome to our storytelling channel, where true stories come to life. If this journey moved you, let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? We love hearing from our global family. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss tomorrow's powerful new story. One voice, one life, one story at a time. It all began with a quiet evening and a television screen. Anja Ringgren Lovén, a Danish woman who had grown up in Sweden, was at home, relaxing like anyone else. She flipped through the channels looking for something to watch, something light, perhaps something inspiring. But what she found instead was a nightmare unfolding in daylight. The title of the documentary read, "The Witch Children of Africa." Curious, she leaned in. Within minutes, her heart broke. The documentary revealed a dark, horrifying truth. Innocent children in parts of Nigeria were being accused of witchcraft. Not by strangers, but by their own communities. And sometimes even their own families. These children were beaten, burned, starved, abandoned, and in some cases, left to die. And all because of superstition. Anja sat frozen, unable to look away. How could something so cruel be happening in the modern world? How could fear and ignorance lead to such unbearable suffering, especially for children? At first, it felt too overwhelming. She was just one person. What could she possibly do? But Anja wasn't new to humanitarian work. She had spent years volunteering in African countries like Malawi and Tanzania. She had seen poverty before. She had seen struggle. But this was something different. This was injustice fueled by deeply rooted belief systems, and it was targeting the most vulnerable of all. The documentary didn't just show the problem. It lit a fire inside her. She began researching more, reading every report she could find. The deeper she looked, the more disturbing it became. Children were being labeled as witches for things like having epilepsy, being left-handed, being too quiet, or simply being born during a family crisis. It wasn't religion. It was fear. It wasn't protection. It was punishment disguised as faith. Anja knew she couldn't look away anymore. In 2012, she founded a Danish non-profit organization with a single mission: to fight against superstition, raise awareness, and protect children accused of witchcraft. Her eyes were on Nigeria, where the crisis was at its worst. And the following year, in 2013, she packed her bags and flew to the country for the very first time. It was a leap of faith, not just across continents, but across cultures, across language barriers, and across centuries of fear. She had no guarantee that people would listen. She didn't know if she could make a difference, but she believed that one person, with enough courage and compassion, could be the start of something greater. That belief, born from the shock of a documentary, would soon become the foundation of Land of Hope, a home for children the world had thrown away. And in that moment, watching that one film, Anja Ringgren Lovén's life changed forever. That plane ride to Nigeria wasn't just a flight. It was the beginning of a revolution. After witnessing the horrors from the documentary, Anja Ringgren Lovén couldn't shake the images from her mind. The cries of abandoned children, the lifeless eyes of the outcast. She'd made up her mind. This wouldn't be just another sad story she watched from the comfort of her couch. This would be her mission. So in 2013, she stepped off the plane into a country she'd never been to, chasing hope in the middle of chaos. But reality hit harder than she expected. Nigeria was nothing like Denmark. The heat was suffocating, the noise was relentless, and the stares she got as a white woman walking through remote villages were intense. But the hardest thing to face was the truth. Superstition wasn't just whispered in corners. It was preached in churches, reinforced by leaders, and accepted by entire communities. Children, as young as 2, were being thrown into the streets for having nightmares, stuttering, or just being different. She realized early on she couldn't fight this war alone. That's when she met David Emmanuel Umem, a passionate Nigerian human rights lawyer who had also seen the damage superstition was causing. He wasn't just smart, he was fearless. And, like her, He believed that children deserved protection, not persecution. The two joined forces, partners in purpose and soon partners in life. Together they began rescuing children one by one, abandoned under trees, found starving in ditches, tied up in sheds, some barely clinging to life, some too traumatized to speak. Most had been accused by their own families. In the beginning there was no shelter, no funding, just raw determination. Anja and David scraped together what little they had and started building something that would become a sanctuary in a war zone. They called it Land of Hope. Word started to spread. Locals began tipping them off about children in danger. And with each rescue, the mission grew. It wasn't just about saving lives, it was about changing hearts, about confronting centuries-old beliefs with compassion, not condemnation, and about building a home that didn't just protect, but healed. One rescue stood out among the rest, a boy named Hope. He was barely alive when they found him, naked, weak, his belly swollen from malnutrition. His village had labeled him a witch and left him to die. Anja held him in her arms, tears running down her face, not knowing if he'd survive the night. But he did. And that photo of her giving him water from a bottle would go viral. Suddenly, the world was watching. Donations poured in, volunteers reached out, and Land of Hope began to rise from the dust brick by brick. What started with one woman, one heartbreaking documentary, and one brave decision had become a lifeline for hundreds of children. But the fight was far from over. Every child they rescued had a story, but some stories stayed with you forever. After months of working side by side, rescuing children who had been labeled as witches and thrown out like garbage, Anja and David came across a case that would shake them to their core. It was a call from a local villager, a tip, barely a whisper, about a little boy abandoned near a remote village road. No name, no details, just a hunch that something terrible had happened. They followed the lead, prepared for the worst. But nothing could have prepared them for Hope. He was barely 2 years old, naked, skin like parchment, ribs pressing through his belly, and eyes so hollow they looked like they didn't belong to a child at all. Flies swarmed his tiny body, worms crawled from open sores, and around him, silence. No mother, no father, just a stretch of dusty road and a child left to die. The villagers said his parents had gone, said he was a witch. That was all. Anja didn't wait. She scooped him into her arms, holding him like the world was ending. She said later that his body felt like paper, like he could break if she held him too tightly. She had no idea if he would survive the drive to the hospital. They named him Hope because that's what he gave them, even in his suffering. That photo of Anja kneeling beside him, feeding him water from a bottle, captured the world. It went viral. Not because it was staged or polished or posed, but because it was real, raw, the kind of image that makes you stop scrolling and stare. It forced people to ask, how does this happen, and what can we do about it? The rescue of Hope changed everything. Donations began pouring in from every corner of the world. Land of Hope expanded. More beds, more staff, more reach, and most importantly, more saved children. But with each rescue came darker stories. There was Michael, a 7-year-old boy who had been accused by his entire village. They said he brought bad luck. One night, a group of men grabbed him and beat him bloody. He escaped in the dark, hiding in bushes, trembling with fear. When Anja's team found him days later, he couldn't speak. Not a single word, just wide eyes and a fake smile that masked years of trauma. Took months of therapy, of gentle words, of quiet nights reading stories, but slowly, Michael began to trust again. Today, he's unrecognizable, top of his class, kind, soft-spoken, and always the first to say thank you at dinner. They call him the gentleman at Land of Hope, but behind every smile is a scar, and behind every rescued child, a nightmare they survived. These weren't isolated cases. They were part of a pattern, systemic, cultural, and brutal. And Anja knew saving a child was just the beginning. Anja knew that rescue was only the first step. Healing took much longer. The children who arrived at Land of Hope came broken in more ways than one. Their bodies bore the bruises, yes, but their souls, their trust, their ability to feel safe, that had been shattered. Some flinched at every sound. Others stared blankly into the distance. A few, like Michael, smiled and joked as if nothing had happened, because pretending was the only way they'd survived. And still, they were the lucky ones. For every child that made it to Land of Hope, Anja feared there were 10 more who never would. Girls as young as 9 were being buried alive. Boys were being tied to trees and left for animals. Infants were tossed into rivers. And in some churches, places that claimed to preach salvation, pastors were charging families money to perform brutal exorcisms. It wasn't religion. It was business, and it was killing children. Anja and David weren't just rescuing victims. They were going head-to-head with powerful forces, corrupt leaders, false prophets, entire communities steeped in fear. They received threats. Locals accused them of interfering with God's will. Some claimed Land of Hope was sheltering real witches. But Anja didn't back down, because by now she wasn't just a humanitarian, she was a mother. After giving birth to her son David Jr. in 2014, Anja said her perspective changed forever. Holding her baby in her arms, she imagined the mothers of the children they rescued. Mothers who had been forced to give up their sons and daughters, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. They weren't monsters, she said. They were victims of a belief system that taught them to fear their own blood. Still, her anger burned at the pastors, the elders, the systems that allowed this cruelty to go unchecked. This shouldn't be normal. Torture shouldn't be wrapped in scripture. Death shouldn't be justified by dogma. And yet, it was. But for every act of hate, there was a chance to fight back, with compassion, with truth, with education. Land of Hope grew into more than a shelter. It became a school, a safe haven, a symbol. The walls echoed with laughter. The classrooms were filled with eager hands and curious minds. And the children, who once thought they were cursed, were now writing poetry, playing soccer, and dreaming of futures once stolen from them. The battle was far from over, but one thing was clear: ignorance had ruled long enough. It was time to shine a light. Anja knew the road ahead was dangerous. She knew more children would need saving. But she also knew this: you cannot kill an idea once hope takes root. The deeper Anja went into this fight, the clearer one truth became. The real battle wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Witchcraft accusations weren't only about fear. They were about ignorance, poverty, and power. The perfect storm. In a place where access to healthcare was limited, where education was underfunded, and where pastors were sometimes treated like prophets or kings, it wasn't hard for superstition to thrive. But Anja believed that the most powerful weapon in this war wasn't money. It wasn't politics. It was education. She and David knew they couldn't just build walls to shelter children. They had to build minds that could withstand lies. So Land of Hope wasn't just a home. It became a full-fledged school. Every child rescued would receive quality education: books, math, science, art, therapy, and history. They would learn how to read, how to think, how to dream beyond the limitations of their past. But perhaps even more important, they would learn how to love themselves again. Hope, the boy left to die at age 2, was now one of the brightest students at the center. Michael, once too traumatized to speak, had become a leader in class. These weren't just stories of survival. They were proof that a different future was possible, if someone dared to invest in it. Still, outside the gates of Land of Hope, the danger remained. Many of the villagers were slowly opening their hearts. Some came to apologize. Others came with their own children begging for help. But not everyone was ready to change. In one rural town, youth gangs had begun forming with the sole purpose of identifying and cleansing suspected witches. Their targets: children who didn't speak much, kids who had seizures, girls who were born during a family death. The signs were always arbitrary: But the punishment was always the same: exile, torture, or worse. Anja knew the system had failed these kids long before the abuse ever started. She pointed to the Child Rights Act of 2003, a law that, on paper, protected children from violence, accusation, and abandonment. But in practice, only 27 out of 36 Nigerian states had adopted it, and only one, Akwa Ibom, had specific laws outlawing witch branding. The rest? Loopholes, silence, complicity. So Anja kept speaking, loudly, at press conferences, on social media, in classrooms, in front of government officials. Not with anger, but with undeniable evidence: photographs, testimonies, survival stories, and most importantly, the children themselves. She told the world, "These children are not witches. They are sons and daughters. They are future doctors, artists, engineers, and mothers. You don't exile a future, you protect it." Every lesson taught at Land of Hope wasn't just about school. It was about dignity. It was about showing a child who had been told they were evil that they are, in fact, extraordinary. And while many still turned away, Anja remained unshaken, because she had seen firsthand what could happen when one child, once left to die, is given a pencil, a uniform, and a second chance. We'd love to hear your thoughts after hearing this powerful story. What part touched you the most? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something that made you realize how deeply fear and ignorance can shape people's actions? Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and what message you think needs to be spread to protect children like Hope and Michael. This story is more than just a tragedy. It's a reminder of how one person's courage can change lives. But change doesn't stop here. The more we talk about this, the more awareness we build, and the more we hold ourselves and each other accountable. Your voice matters. Every comment, every share, and every conversation sparked from this video is a small act of resistance against silence. So don't just scroll past. Take a moment to reflect, respond, and help us keep these stories alive. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. Tomorrow we'll bring you another true story of courage, loss, and the human spirit that refuses to give up. Together, let's build a world where every child has the right to feel safe, loved, and believed in.